Shout out to my Discord mod Senhor House for the suggestion. What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be ranking the hand-to-hand combat skills of every Metal Gear character on a tier list. The ranks, from lowest to highest, will be Chicken for people who generally don't fight, don't have any applicable hand-to-hand skills, or don't use skills to fight. Fox, people that reasonably have a decent hand-to-hand foundation or have shown some martial arts skills. Snake, for people whose martial arts skills are concretely above that of real-life Special Forces soldiers or professional fighters. Boss, for people that so far outstrip everybody else that they're in a league of their own. And Big Boss, the absolute best of the best. Okay, starting at Chicken, we've got Paz from MGSV, who's literally not even real and is just a figment of Venom's imagination. That one kid from Rising that, does nothing but get kidnapped. Sonny, who's a little nerd kid. Code Talker, basically every archetypal scientist since Metal Gear. The Emmerichs, Strangelove, and Doctor. The American and African world leaders. Common people, from Gran and the Soviet scientist to Cecile, who is at least briefly an MSF scout. Then the Psychics, since they literally fight without using their hands. Then Naomi, since she might have learned something from Frank. Dr. Clark, since she was a part of Fox and likely learned at least the basics at the time. Then Volgan, due to being Special Forces, but over-relying on brute strength and his supernatural powers. Then Fat Man and Raven, since they were both high-level Special Forces operatives, but relied on explosives, heavy weapons, shamanistic powers, and, in Raven's case, likely fought with brute strength in CQC. Jonathan is likely Vulcan Raven Plus, since he's a similar character, but stands to benefit from several decades of advancements in hand-to-hand combat. And finally Armstrong, as he's shown to rely almost solely on physical strength and nanomachines, but also has available the most advanced and up-to-date martial arts knowledge on this list. Overall, no real standouts, but that's to be expected, really. It's basically the de facto no-skill characters dump. Next in Fox, we have the bare minimum squad all the way up to actually respectable. From the bottom to Drebin are Patriot spies that should have some decent hand-to-hand skills potentially, as I find it hard to believe that they would send people after the likes of Big Boss without any way to defend themselves at all. Chico is there due to being a below-average resistance fighter. Stillman's former police, so he definitely received basic hand-to-hand training. Gustavo was part of the STB, the Czech State Security, or a plainclothes police force, so she can likely at least handle herself as well as a police officer. Coldman, Holly, Natasha, and Ames were all CIA and should be trained. Then Johnny and his grandfather, since they're likely comparable in skill, and both Johnnies, while being dogshit at everything, are Special Forces. Then Skullface, who may be near Big Boss in terms of skill via being his other half, but is more likely just an above-average CIA agent in terms of CQC since he's not explicitly a field operative. Then Amanda, as she's an impressive revolutionary soldier and likely has the CQC skills to back it up. Then this dude via being a typical soldier and likely typically trained in CQC from the far-flung future of 2018. Then the Fury in the End via the Fury relying mainly on his flamethrower, and the End being the literal furthest thing we've seen from a CQC expert since we covered the Mantises. But both of them are Cobra units, so they likely have some pretty decent hand-to-hand skills. Then Boris as a modern typical soldier, a soldier with over 40 years more martial arts to learn from as opposed to the Fury in the End, and a soldier who would more realistically end up in a close-range encounter. Then Sigint and Rykov for similar reasons, except both Sigint and Rykov are Special Forces but were active in the 60s. Then Fortune's dad, being that he's a Marines commandant. Then Kassler, being a battle-hardened veteran of the Mercenary War who was considered part of the elite. Then Kamsim, who not only has his experience as a Marine, but also his experience in close-range combat as a Wind of Destruction, or I guess a Gale of Obliteration with his off-brand ass. Then young Colonel Campbell via being a typical Special Forces soldier. Then Sergei Gerlukovich via being an older, more experienced Special Forces soldier. Then current Roy Campbell for the same reasons. Then Major Zero for the same reasons, him having been in the SAS. Then Lieutenant Boa Cunningham via having been in the Fox unit, but only in the capacity of an interrogator. Then the Pain as another Cobra, but at least a mid-range fighter that may need CQC skills. Then shockingly Johnny in MGS4, being that he's slightly less of a fuck-up and is, again, a 2010s Special Forces operative. Then Meryl in MGS1 via being an average next-gen Special Forces soldier. Then Monsoon via being pretty good at CQC, but relying way too much on his electromagnetism gimmick. Then Fortune via being a Dead Cell member, a group that should more or less scale to or above MGS1 Foxhound. Then the Sorrow, who was a Cobra unit member that seemed to supplement his normal skill with his medium powers. Then Sniper Wolf via likely at least having the combat prowess of a Special Forces human/wolf hybrid at close range. Then Ed, Meryl's second-in-command in MGS4, who should have comparable CQC skills. Then Crying Wolf, who's even more of a furry than Sniper Wolf. Then MGS4 Meryl herself, now having over a decade more of experience. Then the Fear, the Cobra unit member that seems the most physically adept. Then Decoy Octopus, who can potentially mimic the skills and abilities of the people he copies. Then Laughing Octopus via her skills with her tentacles likely somewhat transferring to CQC to some degree. Then Raging Raven via being able to take out an entire group of soldiers and civilians by herself as a child. Then of course Null the Perfect Soldier via scaling down from himself in Metal Gear. And finally for Fox, Eli via scaling down from himself in MGS1. Chicken and Fox pretty much handle all the featless people in Guesswork. Now it's time for those few with solid feats and scaling in hand-to-hand. First up in Snake, right above the Fox tier, who else but the men themselves, Frank Fox Yeager and David, Solid Snake. These two of course scale to each other as near equal rivals, but more importantly, at this point they were basically the cream of the crop. The most highly skilled soldiers in most every regard that had ever been seen up to that point. They far outstripped every other legendary soldier before them and were the best of their era, even to the point of future-proofing themselves against even common soldiers in 2018. Next we have Sundowner, who's an exceptional and experienced fighter that could genuinely fight with Raiden, but relies more on his build, his scissor blades, and his explosive shielding rather than his skills. And Quiet, who has a remarkable aptitude for CQC for a sniper, can outclass any regular soldier from her era while they're armed and in a group and her hands are bound, and she can trade with Venom to a degree. The only reason she isn't higher is because the scaling from here becomes incredibly tight. Everyone from here up could be in the same tier themselves with how close it is, but there are enough people in that tier that the gap between the bottom and the top is significant. First there's Grey Fox and Olga, go check out my Grey Fox MGS4 run on my gaming channel, shameless plug, who are directly comparable to each other via the Patriots recreating MGS1 and MGS2 that way, and both of them scale a smidge below Snake and Raiden respectively, just as Frank did in Metal Gear. Then it's Liquid, Snake, and Raiden via Snake and Liquid practically being equals in their hand-to-hand fight, with Snake barely winning out, and via Raiden being trained to basically be MGS1 Snake. Then it's Vamp, who scales slightly above Raiden in hand-to-hand. Then Solidus, Big Boss's perfect clone, who trained Raiden and almost defeated him in their final encounter. And then Solid Snake in MGS2 as standing clearly above where he was in MGS1. In boss tier, we have the truly legendary few soldiers whose hand-to-hand martial skill is considered special even amongst the Special Forces legends. Mistral was probably the second most skilled in the Winds of Destruction in terms of no-gimmick close-range combat, and was able to actually stand up to Raiden somewhat, with her only failings being her use of tripod cores and her multiple arms. Ocelot and Eva, as well as Eva in her old age, were directly comparable to Jack when he first met them, and even a Jack who had been through everything that Snake Eater had thrown at him was able to best Ocelot at close range. Boss was the greatest soldier in history until Naked Snake defeated her, and her hand-to-hand skills not only time and again were on par with an entire Special Forces unit by themselves, and were so impressive they were basically superior to supernatural abilities like the Sorrow's mediumship and Vulcan's electricity, but they basically made her superior to every character in the series, up to her defeat by Naked Snake, placing him directly above her by the end. Finally, we have the Big Boss tier, a tier reserved for those whose skill, in any capacity, including hand-to-hand, is even greater than the boss herself. These few are to be considered one-man armies even with just their bare hands, and are basically fighting game characters in a stealth and espionage game. First, Ursula, whose CQC skills are not only grade A compared to even Big Boss despite also having telekinesis, but she was trained by a Big Boss level soldier that we'll discuss later in this tier, who's quite literally designed as a soldier to be a direct counter to Big Boss. It didn't work, but that should at least give him a solid Snake to Grey Fox level relationship. Speaking of MGS1, Portable Ops' Liquid Snake would be Viper, the man that trained Ursula and Big Boss's greatest adversary to that point. The man is as close to Big Boss's equal as you can get without being straight up equal, and that should apply to his CQC as well. Having beaten them all is of course Port Ops' Big Boss. And moving on to Peace Walker, we have Big Boss and Kaz. With Kaz actually being a direct equal to Big Boss, and Big Boss of course being a better CQC fighter later in life, with more practice and knowledge than he had in Port Ops. Then we have the undisputed best CQC fighters in MGS4, not named Snake anyway, Vamp and Raiden, with Raiden having turned the tables on Vamp by the end of the series and rising above him. Then in a massive shared third place spot, we have Ground Zero's Big Boss and Kaz, Phantom Pain Big Boss, Kaz and Ocelot, Venom, and then MGS1 Ocelot and MGS2 Ocelot. Ocelot should be directly comparable, though slightly below Big Boss based on MGS3, and with Kaz being Boss's equal, they should all be slightly comparable, with Boss and Kaz slightly above. Phantom Pain obviously goes above Ground Zero's. Venom tops out over everyone in MGSV as he has all the skills and experience of Naked Snake, with addition to all the insanely good skill feats of MGSV, and MGS1 and 2 Ocelot scale down from Liquid Ocelot in MGS4. In the second place area, we have the top 3 martial artists in Rising. Blade Wolf, who arguably is the only fighter on the list that only fights with his natural body and is incredibly powerful in close range, beating out Kasim completely and Mistral to a degree, Raiden being comparable to Sam and being the pinnacle of CQC mastery at the end of the series, and Sam himself being the only person in Rising to be a superior martial artist to Raiden. Lastly, ladies and gentle snakes, Liquid Ocelot, MGS4 Solid Snake, Metal Gear Master Miller, and Old Big Boss. Liquid Ocelot and Old Snake are the closest to equal in skill I think I've ever seen in hand-to-hand combat, and both, at this point, should be comparable to Miller and Old Boss, the absolute most skilled martial artists in the series at the height of their superiority. Being that Ocelot is always portrayed as slightly below Boss and Miller in CQC, I might say that Miller and Old Boss are the undisputed best, with Old Snake and Ocelot right behind them, but it's so ridiculously close it's hard to know for sure. Alright folks, that's all for this MGS martial arts skill ranking tier list. Again, shout out to Senhor House for the suggestion. Thanks homie, I hope you liked this one. If you guys enjoyed this and want to see another tier list, let's try for 40 likes on this video in a week. If we can get at least that, you guys get another tier list video, or at least you guys get a vote. If we miss the goal or you guys vote otherwise, I'll be bringing back a series I started a long time ago that did well on release and that I always wanted to continue, but didn't have the time or technology at the time, so stay tuned. Well, I've been Red Fox, the YouTuber, and I hope you all liked my video. Thanks for watching, peace.